Okay guys, welcome back to the channel. Thought I'd give you a different view today, but I've got this different view for a reason. We're talking about room correction today. It's my final video from Toronto Audio Fest. It's an hour-long seminar I attended on the Arc Genesis room correction software that's embedded in the Anthem products. Very similar to Dirac, and as you know, I'm a Dirac user and an advocate for DSP, but I wanted to understand the Arc Genesis a lot more and compare and contrast. Very similar in a lot of ways. So if you are interested in that kind of stuff, this full hour long will be good for you. But or considering that product and want to AB the nitty gritty, it's a long seminar, but I wanted to give you some takeaways if you don't have time to watch the whole thing that are more macro for me. Number one being the measurements. Oh, but before I even go there, I'm dressed up. If you see neck tattoos, all these are fake tattoos. It's the middle of Halloween weekend. Dave's in town. I'm going to be filming a video with him later, fully costumed, so stay tuned for that. But yeah, these are all fake tattoos, FYI. Actually, I never showed you guys. I don't know if I ever showed you guys this bracelet. It's actually made out of the, here's the spindle. It's the label on the album for Dark Side of the Moon. And so the spindle hole is still there, but that's the label for Dark Side of the Moon. It's a bracelet. Pretty cool. I'll wear it at one of the shows if you guys want to check it out next time. But anyway, lots to come for fun. Probably on YouTube Shorts if you want to watch for Halloween weekend. But getting back to why I'm showing you this perspective and how it ties into room treatments is that with the Bach, you now get in-ear measurements. And I'll talk about how that differs from Dirac and Arc Genesis in a minute. But what you realize with all of these software measurement tools is that reflections play a huge role into your impulse response and what you can hear. Certainly people get neurotic about things like fuses, Ethernet switches, cable elevators. That's fine. Okay. But when you get so neurotic about those, but you're not neurotic about reflections hitting your ear that are measurable, empirical, and should be audible if you have good ears and a good system, this is where you should be focusing more of your neurosis. And so for me, as I've gotten these in-ear measurements for the Bach, I've learned with my impulse response where my reflections are coming from and how to treat them and get better results that are audible and also empirically measured. And so for most chairs that people buy, the backrest is higher than the ear. And that provides a source of reflections that can be very negative. So I sit on something that elevates me. I'm not totally sitting up tall right now, but gets my ears above the back. But then I also have this fur. I have a cover of the leather cover. And then I actually have room treatment material actually attached to the chair to help absorb reflections. Because sometimes it's not just enough to get your head above or be in a low-seated chair where you don't have something behind you. Certainly you want to remove immediate reflection points if you can. But it doesn't help too much more, even if you're away from the back wall. If that's still a flat glass surface, it's going to reflect back to you again anyway, just a little bit longer reflection time, which could be even worse sounding to your ears. So you need to both look at reflective surfaces, removing them, or sometimes absorbing them as well, or diffusion. So this is the kind of fun stuff that I think is much more tangible in terms of audibility to be neurotic about than directions of fuses, cable elevators, and all these other products that people actually spend a ton of money on and don't get a lot of results. So I bought the row 1 seating that I featured at Cedia. And there's a lot of reasons why I wanted to support that company. There's a lot of other ones that do similar seating where this little portion here can be reclined and totally free up shoulders and above from any reflective surfaces, or you can bring it back up automatically. There's a lot of other features, so stay tuned for that. But like I said, with all this software, there's a huge takeaway of DSP being better than no DSP. Because one thing you're going to have a takeaway from this video, if you watch the whole thing, you will see the measurements of those rooms at Toronto that I talked about, the small hotel rooms, they measured their pair of Paradigm speakers in that room, and you'll see the measurements. Before correction, terrible. And then post-correction using Arc Genesis. So whether you use Arc Genesis or Dirac or the new optimal room correction software coming to the Bach, I don't want to spoil too much, but it's going to be debuted at Capital Audio Fest, and Edgar's super excited about this. This is just as revolutionary in many ways as the Bach. And luckily, if you ordered the Bach from me, everybody that did is going to get this software for free. Plus, some of them are going to be beta testers before it rolls out as a separate product or as an add-on to the Bach. So stay tuned for that. But let's just say Bach isn't any part of your equation, whatever, you don't have it yet. You should, but in any case, let's say your Dirac or Anthem. Both of those have lots of positives as well. They do things a little bit different. They don't take in-ear measurements. What they do is approximate what's going into your ear with a lot of different measurements and try to use their algorithm to adjust based on those distances. Now, there's always going to be imprecisions with estimating things, and that's what Edgar has wanted to solve now that he has in-ear mics that are flat and he can get that. So that's the advantage that Edgar's been going for. But again, absent that, Dirac and Arc Genesis have been exceptionally good products at correcting for your room. Certainly better than nothing. And there's always nuances. There's always people that use it improperly, and there's always niche scenarios where it may not give you a tangible benefit, maybe induces digital clipping. Although one of the great takeaways with the Arc Genesis, as you'll hear in this demo, is that they give 24 dB of cushion for both volume leveling as well as adjustments of frequency response. So as long as your room behaves pretty well and doesn't have to do a lot of correction, you're not going to have to worry about pushing past digital clipping or any kind of thing, or being short of being able to get optimal results. It's a very impressive product. If you got Anthem and you're using Arc Genesis, I think it's every bit, from what I could tell in this seminar, every bit as good as Dirac. Would I pivot from Dirac if I had Dirac? No. I mean, they probably are so close, and their algorithms are built similarly, such that and I think the gentleman even recognized that Dirac is one of the high quality competitors to their product. So it's not one where you really want to worry about whether you have one or the other, but the key thing takeaway is you should have one or the other, or what's coming down the pipe to address. Because let's talk about a takeaway as well. When you have a room that's not perfect, you can either do room treatments, DSP, and neither one of them solely are going to get you better. They're both going to make some progress to optimal, but the only way to get optimal is to have a combination in most respects. And one thing that I've seen firsthand, a lot of people make these primitive generalizations. Well, DSP can't help you in the bass because there's room modes and that you can't boost your way out of a null and whatnot. Well, that's somewhat true. We proved it in my room. Two of my subs, I was able to DSP one versus the other. JR was running pink noise at the time and a measurement mic on it. As soon as I moved my DSP up, one of them went right out of that null, boosted 1-to-1. Another one didn't. So depending on the placement of your room, the type of null, there's so many variables in the equation. You cannot make primitive generalization that DSP can't help the bass. But in most cases, room treatments and bass traps are going to be a requirement in a lot of rooms to help out DSP. Conversely, DSP is used to help out room treatments because you can't solely use room treatments to treat, let's say you have a peak at 800 hertz that's really annoying, and it could be 6 dB or even 3 dB. How are you going to buy a room treatment just to treat that one area without impacting all these other areas? DSP can narrow or widen the range. The amplitude can be dialed in perfectly such that for the first time, you can start hearing a flat frequency response at your listening position, at your room, hearing what was in the recording, what was at the mastering studio as close as possible. From there, you can even use DSP to tailor to your taste because some people don't like flat. But the only way you're going to be able to do this is not with cable elevators, not with fuses, not with cables. Tuning your system with cables is crazy. If you want to do that, knock yourself out. but do it after you've done it with stuff that can really make a difference, like DSP. So those are the kind of macro takeaways on top of showcasing in this hour-long seminar how well the Arc Genesis product is designed and seems to work. I was definitely impressed. So sign up, subscribe if you haven't already, because I'm going to have a lot more on that Bach optimal room correction as well as some other cool stuff down the pipe. Yeah, didn't have, well, it had something. I don't know what it had. So you have a new version of Arc?
Yeah, well, so we're going to be running through Arc Genesis today. So I kind of like to find out from everyone who's here kind of what they're looking to get from it, right? Because Arc can be available on a number of different products, whether that's on the subwoofer for us or a powered speaker. Some people are looking for clarification on terms of like the measurement positions, the positions you're going to do, how many you're going to do, the mic adjustments, things like that. Other people have specific concerns in terms of the room. So what I'd like to do generally, guys, is kind of start with the basics of how Arc would run. So go through that to make sure that you're using the correct measuring methodology. Then from there, I can kind of address specific questions if you have.
Perfect.
So, does that work?
Yep.
All right, perfect. My name is Brandon Ash. I'm our international training specialist for Paradigm and Anthem. So I'll go through all this stuff with you too. You know, if you guys have questions and things like that, feel free to ask. I'd rather you kind of address them as we go, rather than you kind of wait to be polite and then forget
Okay.
exactly what we're looking for. So to start, let me just show you what this room looked like. So we did a 10 position arc measurement in this room.
10?
Yes. Yep. Now you might be saying right off the bat, you're like, well, what am I'm doing 5, right? So am I doing something wrong? You're not doing anything wrong. We recommend that you do 5. 5 is the bare minimum, right? We need that to provide enough actual data. The reason I like to do more is that you can hear me talking in this room. As you guys can probably imagine, these aren't the best audio demo rooms possible. These are headboards, they are not acoustic paneling. So yeah. Unfortunately, we're not deadening the room much with that stuff. So the reason I do 10 in this case, in this position, is just like statistics. If we have a larger data set, we're less likely to have issues with things like outliers. So if we have one specific really bad null point, it's not going to necessarily color the entire space as badly that way. So what I always suggest is, you guys are probably familiar, we do an X formation. So you kind of think about it like if you were looking over top of your seating position, the intersection of the lines where the X would be, that would be your main listening position. You would start that at
ear level.
Yeah.
Okay.
At ear level. And then anything in front, we're going to create a boundary. So we're going to create a box around your listening area essentially. So that can be as large or as small as you want. So in a lot of people's cases, they like to do a very small box, right? Just around their specific listening chair or their theater seats or their couch. There are advantages though too to doing a larger scale. In that case, what I usually recommend is instead of doing it for multiple positions, for multiple, or I should say widening out your positions and keeping 5, but just putting them wider. So you're joining us for the Arc today? Pardon? Okay. Okay, yeah. Sorry, we're doing an Arc seminar right now. So you're more than welcome to stay if you want to learn a little bit more about Arc Genesis. Sure. Yeah, perfect. So have a seat. If at any point in time, you guys, I don't want to be in trouble here for keeping everyone locked in. So if you need to leave at any point in time or get what you'd like, please do so. Just be respectful of the group. That's all I ask. So kind of what we were talking a little bit about before, right? The idea is you're generally going to do a smaller area because you want it condensed to where you're listening. But with doing additional measurements, we can still get that consistency where you sit, and we can also cover other areas of the room that might cause problems. So just in the science of how the sound works, right? You're going to notice anything that protrudes out of the room is going to increase energy. Anything that kind of exudes out is going to suck out energy or base energy. So it's never a bad idea if you have a challenging room to take different mic positions so that you catch things like bulkheads, windows, reflective surfaces, things like that. If you have a large opening on one side, it doesn't hurt to do that as well. So just to kind of show you, this was the room we had. You're probably taking a look at this and going, okay, well, that doesn't look that bad, Brandon. Let me show you all position measurements for just one speaker in here. And this will give you a pretty good example of why these rooms are not the grandest for this and why room correction helps us a lot. That's my 10 positions. So you see everything from in one position for 4 there, which would have been, memory serves, back into the right in this case. In that case, we have a huge null at that point, right? A couple of them. So by adding additional measurement positions, we're not overcompensating for that, and overall we get better imaging. So just to kind of give you an example, when we ran this on 5 positions, and certain tracks, this speaker actually tended to be biased on the right-hand side, so you could hear things coming specifically from this. Once we ran it on 10, we got our imaging back into the middle. So it just says a lot of times you wouldn't think that. It's a small change you can make in ARC that will make a pretty good sized difference. So,
do you do impulse response measurements as well?
Yeah, that's how ARC is built off of, right?
Okay.
It's an infinite impulse response system. So we do that through a number of filters, and then additionally on new ARC products, so if you have an existing MRX X40, products like that, they'll now offer phase and distance as well. So phase and distance calculation. And we'll do that actually by using our new microphone. So the new microphone is a little bit more sensitive up top. Any of you guys have the older Anthem products by chance? Does anyone have an MRX X20 or an ADM60? So another benefit on these mics, they're more sensitive. They have a microphone in the front that will actually be able to ping for directionality. So I shouldn't say directionality, for timing. And then on top of that, the top microphone is a little bit more sensitive. So you'll get better results as well. So when we're setting this up, we would always want to suggest when you're doing ARC to do it on, you're always going to want to do ARC on whatever products you have that are lowest frequency first. So in this case, I would always recommend if you have a Paradigm subwoofer or Martin Logan subwoofer running ARC on it. When you're doing it, it's going to be a good idea to keep your positions consistent, right? If you're going to do 10 positions on your Anthem, you're probably going to do 10 positions on your sub. And then maybe, if you have our Persona 9Hs or hybrid towers or a 120H, you're going to want to do the same thing. So what I usually recommend is when you are placing your positions, take something just to mark it, just like you would if you're on a golf green, right? If someone's in front of you, you put a penny or a marker down, same kind of thing. You can use paint and tape as well, and that way you can identify each position. So to start, and I'll use the demo mode just to kind of quickly show you the basics of it. So let's say for this purpose, we're going to actually use the mic position for around here. I'm just going to use this because it's an open chair, guys, so apologies here. And sir, I'm going to use you as our guinea pig, so we're actually going to use you as ear height, okay?
Okay.
So what we would do in this case, we'll try to keep this essentially so that it's at ear height for this gentleman. In this case, he's in the chair, so what we're going to do is we're going to act like we're cooing the middle of both chairs, right? So let's act like this was actually our main listening position. So we're going to keep that roughly at his ear height. Let me just tighten that up a tad. We're going to keep that dot so it's facing forward. We're going to want to make sure that's the case. It's always a good practice to get in. We're going to do one sweep first, and then it's going to sweep for distance. At that point in time, that's when we need to make sure that dot is facing forward. That's going to sweep each specific speaker so we get a response time. You might be saying, well, why aren't we just measuring diagonally, right? With a tape measure, that's the way we traditionally do it. That can work, but it doesn't take into effect room reflection. It doesn't take into effect things like DSPs on your powered speaker. So I always use an anecdote of my own at my house. When I built my home, please no one judge me. When I built my home, unfortunately, the guy who ran the wire put an RG6 cable in for my subwoofer. If you guys aren't familiar, if you're ever doing a home reno or anything like that, RG6 is much more susceptible to humming, but it's what most people use for cable now, so that's why they put it in. So unfortunately, my sub drop I had installed didn't work as a sub drop, so I ended up adding a wireless transmitter. The wireless transmitter, my physical sub was about 8 feet. It tones out to 23 feet in terms of delay. So that's the combination of the latency of the wireless transmitter and then the DSP on the subwoofer. So that's why it's very important. When we're talking about phase integration, we're going to integrate our mains with our subwoofer. And now with Anthem products, you can do this on a number of subwoofers. When you get up to 4 subs, trying to integrate phase on all of them becomes very complex, right? Because each time you adjust it on one, you've changed the characteristics on the other. So this makes it much faster, much more easy for you to do, and there's no guesswork in terms of it. So we would start with our mic there in our main listening position. Again, if we have a Paradigm or a Martin Logan subwoofer, I would recommend doing that first, using the same positions. If you guys aren't familiar, it's going to work very similar. The only difference is in these cases, it's going to be a USB connection. So you're going to physically connect the USB into the subwoofer and then the microphone to your computer, place it, and then do the same positions. Any of your Anthem stuff, less tripping hazard, it's all network safe. So at that point, you can kind of walk around with your mic and it makes life easier. So in this case, we go back through. Are you guys, just out of curiosity too, is anyone here using ARC before? Have you used it at all? Okay. So ARC will open in what's called automatic mode. So this gentleman here mentioned when I said 10 measurements, he was like, what the heck, right? So these are things that you can access in pro mode. So professional mode, which I'll show you momentarily, it works just like auto mode does, but auto mode is based off kind of the science of the basis of ARC. So 96% of people will prefer the same signature and sound. So what we're doing when we get into pro mode is it's going to allow us to change and augment the sound, to create additional profiles, take different measurements, all that kind of stuff. And I'll talk to you a little bit about why that's important and when. So for the time being, let's go ahead and launch ARC. So in this case, I'm going to do a demo mode for you guys. This will save us from having to hear the screeching test tones. So I assume most of you here are interested in ARC in a home theater application. Is that fair to say? Right? Okay. So the principles of ARC will work regardless whether it's a 2-channel product, a subwoofer, or a home theater system. Anywhere from a 5-channel all the way up to 15 channels, right? And 4 subs. So for today's purpose, what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of dumb it down a little bit so we can get through the process a little faster for you. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Perfect. So we'd open up our ARC system. It's going to detect the product we have connected based on network or the fact we're connected via USB. It's going to ask us to configure our system. So in this case, I'm going to make this a little more simple of a system. We're going to leave our metric for our position. Actually, you know what? Let's change that to imperial just for the hell of it. We're going to remove our heights. When you are running ARC, always remember that we like everything sequential. So in this case, even if you have 5 speakers, but these speakers their surrounds are behind you, they're still considered surrounds. They aren't considered backs until we have 5 to begin with. You have to have 7 to add backs to it. That's just kind of how Dolby uses for processing. So you'll notice when I do this, those disappear, right? Your heights. You'll notice also when I add back my backs here, we're going to kind of give you a hint. And now no longer are surrounds kind of halfway in the back angled. They're dedicated surrounds with dedicated back channels. If you were to wire it otherwise, so these are wired into your surrounds, at that point in time you're going to get an error because ARC's going to be looking for speaker 1, 2, 3, and then it's going to tone out the other one you have, and there's nothing there. So it will error out at that point. So for today's purpose, we're just going to do a 5-channel just to keep this pretty quick, okay? I'm going to turn off any speakers I'm not using. So again, anything I'm not using, I want to make sure that either these are enabled as off or height channels, and I want to make sure that the sliders on the other products are all off. They're not green. In this case, 5 measurements would start right off the bat, and I'll show you that as a start first in terms of it, and then I'll show you how an example of why I would have done 10, or in this case, I'll do 9. 9 is usually the safest one for most homes because you're going to frame your main listening area, and then you're going to expand out to frame another ring around it. So we're going to set our front left distance in this case. This is about 7.5 feet from that main listening position. The reason we do this is that even though now with ARC it will detect the distances, sometimes the distances can expand on what we actually have for actual distance, right? So if our number in the receiver only does 30 feet, it can be a little too much. So what we do is we have a relative, and that way if that is exceeding what we can have, this becomes 0 feet and everything else is added to it. That's kind of what we're doing from here. So we'll go ahead and we'll set that to 9 positions. We'll hit continue. We have our microphone connected at this point, which will auto-identify, and we'll be ready to go. We hit start, we go through our test tones. Each tone you're going to see a different frequency wave in terms of that speaker and that position that's being taken. It's going to go through each specific one. And then at this point, on the newer version of ARC, it would ask you to stay where the microphone is. So keep it in that position. So on the demo mode, it's just unfortunately hasn't been updated yet because this is a newer feature. But what you would do is leave it in that same position. It will then ping it for distance. So it will ping one speaker versus every other speaker. So it'll use your front right as your reference point, and then every additional speaker will be done to that.
Those are actual measurements that were made in this room here.
Not in this room, no.
Okay.
Yeah, so in order to do it for you for this guy, I will show you the measurements I took afterwards a little bit more in detail. I'll show you how to look at those when you're making your adjustments.
Yeah, I'd like to see that because, as you mentioned, the sound in here has not been that great.
Yes.
Even your voice is reverbing. And so I'd like to see how it correlates to.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's something I've been trying to diagnose.
Yeah.
What's going on in here. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And well, it's one of the things too with Archon in our rooms. A lot of times we're playing at a little louder volume than a lot of the other brands out there, and part of that is because we were able to tailor it. So because Arc will take out excessive bass amounts, and we're even able to do things like spectral tilt. So these speakers are generally pretty neutral, but in this room, this is a particularly bad one. They tend to have a ringing, especially at loud volumes, right? You probably noticed that as you went around.
Yeah.
A lot of the speakers that you know and you love that you may have auditioned at a dealer sounded very nice. Here, they get them up to pretty high volume and they start to become grating. And it's just the nature of the rooms, unfortunately, right? So that's one of the aspects in ARC, and I'll point that out for you too, sir, when we're doing it. So from this point, we're now in our position 2 measurement, right? So it's going to ask us to start with our front left in terms of that. So our main seating position. Now, what you could do, you could actually keep this as close as possible. So let's say we're keeping it for the front 2 seats. Let's say this is primarily for you and your wife, or you and whoever your partner, right? So at that point, I would set this up. We want it essentially about 6 inches down from our main listening position, and we're going to start creating that boundary. Now, in a normal 5 position measurement, this is probably going to be close to this other seat, right? If this was the one side of your couch, you're going to keep it like that. And that's how we're going to show you an arc on the first 5 positions. We're always going to show you to frame that couch on the left, the front left, the back left, so forth and so on. In this case, I'm going to do it a little tighter. We're going to see about 6 inches down. Anything in front of us, guys, we're going to try to keep that 6 inches down on the mic. The algorithm is designed to measure on a 3-dimensional plane, so you'll get better overall results that way. So I'm just taking a look here. We're going to say that's about 6 inches. We're going to keep it at least 2 feet from each prior measurement. So the goal is generally to keep 2 feet from prior measurement and 2 feet from the wall. Okay? So we're going to go through, go ahead and hit our next on our position on that. It would take the unadjusted frequency response in that position. And this is how we're going to identify areas that may be more susceptible to things like lulls.
Now, should you be seated in your seat while these measurements are taken, or should you be out of the seat?
You can be seated, like generally if you have the mic in the position, it's going to be hard for you to sit in it too. But you can sit adjacent to it. You're not going to cause that much of a difference. One thing I would suggest is make sure that you leave the room in the conditions you're going to use it in. So there's no point dragging the coffee table out because you think it's a reflective surface. ARC needs to understand how the sound reflects off those surfaces. So make sure you keep that. In this case then, we're going to move here to our next 3rd position. We're just going to move on the opposite side. We're going to keep that mic approximately 6 inches down from the listening height we started at. If you have multiple individuals in the family and you're trying to kind of get the best of both worlds, try to pick an average point. We're going to go ahead here as well. Again, we're going to walk through this. It's going to show you different curves for it because we have to change the sides. Again, I'll show you all this stuff too in this actual real room once we run through this basic demo. We're then going to move back to the back of it. So at this point, gentlemen, pardon me, sorry sir. Generally don't try to rub your microphone on the top of the popcorn ceiling either, would advise against that. We want to keep it somewhere here. So at this point we want to keep somewhere, actually generally, in my case, I would probably put it a little closer to this gentleman here, just so that way when we're actually running it, it's kind of equivalent, right? Mm-hmm. One thing I would suggest when you're doing your measurements is to try to keep everything as equivalent or symmetrical as you can. So keep your distances equal when you can. If you have an odd shaped room, you can adjust for that, but that's the best practice. We're going to make sure that this exceeds the height, so about 6 inches up from our prior listening. This gentleman here is a little taller, so we'll put it up for there. We'll say that's about 6 inches above him in this case. If it wasn't, you can use the chair or whatever for rising. When you are putting the mic positions behind you, make sure that they are rised enough that they actually they exceed things like your sofa. If you have theater chairs, it's not going to do much good if your mic only catches a little bit of it. At that point, I'd rather you be more than 6 inches up over listening. Just that way you're going to get some sound. When we're going to do that, it's going to go through. Then we're going to do the same thing just on the other side. So we would take this microphone and put it next to the other gentleman over here. Sorry guys. So essentially keeping that same position, we've made a small box around your primary listening position. We're at least 2 feet from each prior measurement. We technically go a little bit further over there, but just so we don't, kind of push this gentleman out. And then after this, in most cases, this would give you a pretty good basis for ARC. So you would be good to go. Auto mode would finish it, it would do its calculations, and it would upload. There wouldn't be anything additionally I have to do. Now, I've said to do a few more positions because this room isn't ideal, and again, I can show you the differences we've done. So now it's going to ask me to exceed the position measurements. So I'm going to take this, pardon me, sir. And now what I'm basically going to do is suggest redoing the same thing, but now we're going to keep it a little further away. So you might be saying, okay, well, there's not that much on this wall, Brandon. You still want to keep it because if I'm going to do a point closer to an opening, closer to a bulkhead, I want to get as much down as I can. So again, I would be about 6 inches down from where my main listening height was. This is probably somewhere around there. I want to keep about 2 feet from my walls and my surfaces. But now I've framed a larger area. Again, I would do that when I'm going through position 6 and 7, 8, and 9. So that would be 6. Just to kind of save some time for you guys, I'm going to go over here and essentially do what would be 7 for you. The reason I like to point this out is that once we get above the 5 positions, you're going to notice on the examples it gives you, they don't really make sense, right? You're kind of in front, you're off to the side, because we want you to use your own kind of common sense. You're going to try to frame the room in the way it works best for you. So in this case, I would try to get close to here essentially, right, symmetrically, so I can kind of catch how that reverbs off here. Same thing in the back. There's a wall that's not straight. There's also glass. So I would do the same thing when I do my other positions in the back. And I would have cranked up here. I would try to keep it essentially in line with where my prior position was, and as high as I can get, to essentially exceed whatever your your couch was. I would do that, and then I would move it to the other side over here when I finish. That's going to give me 9 position measurements. That's going to catch things like a little bit better data on how we deal with that slanted wall, the indent there, things like that. It's going to provide you with generally better imaging and things like that as well. So we'll go through this real quick for you.
But is it capturing, because it's so far away from your listening position, is it capturing how these things you're talking about for the listening position, or for people, is it widening the sound state, the sweet spot what is the goal for it, I guess?
So what we're doing, right, is we're not necessarily trying to make it a perfect sweet spot for listening just in one spot. Okay. We're trying to correct for the issues in the room, because the sound is going to hit you from the back as well, right?
That's why you're using average in so many. Yeah. But like, let's say you're a 2-channel guy doing it and you only listen by yourself most of the time in your sweet spot. Should you just take 2 measurements close to your spot and then use the algorithm?
No, you always want to do at least 5.
Okay, so, but just do them close to your head.
Yeah, you could do, well, generally if you're going to do it in that case, it's not so much, I think what you're talking about is in the way some other systems do it, where they recommend essentially moving the microphone around your head.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So we don't necessarily, our algorithm isn't designed to work in that same manner. Okay. It works similarly in terms of the end results, but what we're trying to do is define data in terms of how the sound reflects into the room, and then we can adjust it so that it does sound proper in your sweet spot. It's also going to make it so that when you're sitting in one versus the other, if you move positions on your couch to the other side, you're not going to hear a nasty null that you might have there. Just my own personal situation, I have a subwoofer, I have an XR13 on one side of the center. I have a really bad null in that spot. I moved it onto the other and it's fine, but my wife is the one who sits in front with the good bass, and I was the one who's sitting on the side that it wasn't. So by using a larger amount of overall measuring positions, it averages everything out and we can still get better overall sound. Yeah, when you're doing something in a 2-channel environment, generally you probably want to frame a small box around your main listening position, and then you can still frame another one outside further. You just want to make sure it's at least 2 feet out. So from an example of a single chair, you're only going to go about 2 feet from either position, right? So start in your middle and then basically go out to the distance of what my arms are, right? Front and back, down 6 inches, up 6 inches from there. From there, if you want to do 10 position measurements, and you want to get a little bit better understanding of how the sound interacts in the room, bump that from 5 to 9, and then go out an additional 2 feet on the same axis. So now instead of being out here, we also have positions out here, right? We're not widening it that drastically. In cases too, depending on the situation in the room you're in, sometimes it actually is beneficial to make it a little wider, just because that way you do pick up things like an open wall on one side. Anywhere the sound is going to like leave the room or is going to bounce back, we're going to try to get better information on how that works.
Now, none of the 10 measurements, though, were right at my head where I am now, right? Is that right?
The first, you're talking when I did the arc on this system?
Yeah, like we didn't put the mic where my head is.
No, not in your case, yeah. Just because you're sitting there currently.
But that's part of one of the 10, okay.
Yeah, you would want to sit, so wherever your main positioning is, that's where you ideally want to keep it. If you're in a situation, it's very common where it's like, you and your wife or something, or your partner, sometimes people like keeping it in the middle, and then that way it's even. To be honest with you, I would usually recommend keeping it for one person. It's not going to vary that drastically one side or the other. So that would give you essentially what you see here. Now, once we finish this, we would upload this to our device. Then we would generally launch our auto phase and distance. When we launch our auto phase and distance, we're going to take that microphone, we're going to bring it back into our main listening position. We're going to make sure that the microphone is always pointing straight up and that dot on the front is facing forward. At that point, it would ping each speaker and the sub. So we're going to try to integrate. So each specific sub you have you're going to see it go through the phases. So 0 degrees, 10 degrees, 15 degrees, 5 degrees, 45. And what we're going to do is show you the actual volume amplitude output. So normally when you guys set phase, right, if you've done it, you can either wire your speaker backward or like out of phase essentially closest, all that kind of stuff, and adjust, listening for the lowest amount. The other one that's common too, especially on Paradigm products, because we have that app, you can sit in your main listening position, play something you're familiar with, and then rotate through the dial. Or have a friend or a family member sit next to the sub while you're in the position and try to go. The downside of that is usually there's 2 spots in it that sound very similar, right, in that 180. So you're not getting the absolute best. Still pretty good, still better than what you would get without doing it. So we're going to do that for you analytically, so it's going to show you the output. You'll see your waves, you'll see which one is stronger. And then that will peg it to what it is. It becomes even more important when you add additional subwoofers, because that becomes more challenging than to integrate each specific one as you go through, right? So it will test tone each specific sub for you too, in regards to how it responds to your fronts. We're only phase integrating our fronts. We're not trying to phase integrate the remaining channels on it, just to make sure that our front bass soundstage is smooth. So that's how that would work for you. From there, we'll show you a little bit about the room we just did. So that's basically been ran through ARC specifically. I'm going to open our existing ARC file here. Now, I was talking to you guys about doing 9 positions. In this case, I did 10. The reason I did 10 is because I could double up for a center position for both rows. So that's kind of what I'm doing. I'm just trying to provide a good enough data set that we can get a little bit better results overall. So this was the room we had. So just like I'm sure you guys are aware, the big difference with ARC, there's 2 main ones. All room correction systems will do the basics of taking measurements. So just to kind of run you through this really quickly. This is our front left. That's our 10 position measurements on our front left, just we showed you that before, right? So there's some nasty nulls there, there's a few peaks. This will vary as I go from speaker to speaker, right? In terms of it, you know, that's nastier for the peak, not quite as bad for the lull on the right. And then our subwoofer in this case. You might be asking, well, why does the subwoofer not seem as volatile as the other mains do? That's because I ran ARC already on the sub. So that way it's been ran twice. So this is actually a little bit more normalized, and then I can normalize even further when I run ARC to make sure I hit those specific targets. Just for the record too, guys, if you are looking at investing in your system, just something incrementally, you don't have a great room correction system like ours, or like Dirac is another really reputable one too. Adding something like a Paradigm sub will actually greatly increase your overall room correction capabilities on something like more mainline receiver, something that's using Odyssey or YPow. You're going to get the same level of room correction that comes in a $6,000 amplifier in a sub for $700-800. So, and that will make a big difference, specifically when you're trying to run Odyssey or something like that. I know oftentimes we talk to people in our industry and they don't even like running those systems because all they do is they take the volume away, they don't add or fill up anything. So this is the same thing that all of our systems will do. All room correction systems will take measurements, right? We can take a little bit more. All that averages out to that. From there, I can do my level adjustment. This is the same thing we see with all room correction systems too, right? We want to make sure that your front right and your front left hit you at the same level of volume at the same time. So we do that. This is all the same, and then we apply a crossover for basic bass management. This is the same thing Odyssey's doing, everyone else is doing. So there's not a ton of crazy stuff going on yet. I'll just take that one away. Then we get into this. This is our target curve. So this is a little bit different with us. So one of the big things that ARC has an advantage of is this phenomenon called room gain. So if you're familiar with what room gain is, it's the idea that your brain expects to hear more bass than is naturally present. It's kind of the idea of when your eyes are bigger than your stomach. You think you want more food than you actually are going to be able to eat. It's just a natural thing for some reason we do. Same kind of thing happens with psychoacoustics. We expect to hear more bass, right? That's why oftentimes people prefer putting things in a corner until you get to be a more nuanced listener, and then you notice that it's boomy and it's uncontrolled, right? So what we do here is we calculate the room gain on a case-by-case basis. This was a phenomenon that was developed by the NRC, or researched by the NRC during the double-blind listening test in the Athena project. There's a famous thing out there called the Harbin curve. That's what a lot of the products use, like Dirac and things like that. It's kind of a one-size-fits-all, right? So I always kind of equate it to, if you're a baseball cap guy, it's the stretch fit hat. It works pretty good for the most part in comparison to having something that doesn't fit. But if you're like me and you have a big giant head, it doesn't fit the greatest, right? So what we do is we calculate room gain independently in each specific room. So you could run this room, and I could run the room next to it that has different dimensions, and each one's going to be different. We even have things like distribution amplifiers now, so you could have your in-ceiling speakers in your kitchen and your bathroom and your living room, and they all have room correction, because that way you can calculate the room gain. It's going to be different in your bathroom versus your kitchen versus your living room, right? Different surfaces, different reflections. And then finally, that's how close we can get to it. So the big things to notice here, all room systems will actually be, room correction systems will be able to take away your peaks. We can always make things quieter, right? That's not generally too difficult. The problem happens is we can't bump specific frequencies up in most of them. This is where something like ARC does. Parametric EQs used to do this, right? But the issue with parametric EQs is that you're kind of at the mercy of what you're doing, and you can do a lot of harm to your products as well. You can bump something to the point of too much gain, you send distortion through it, now you've damaged your product. So ARC automates all most of this stuff for you, and it puts it in a safe range. When you enable ARC, you have about 24 decibels of headroom. That's 12 decibels for levels, so you can go up or down, 12 dB for each speaker. You have 6 decibels for independent frequency manipulation, so the ability to fill in things like these ruts. And then in addition to that, you have 6 decibels for that room gain phenomena. So you're able to augment the bass a little bit as well. You can do all these without really being at risk of introducing dangerous distortion based on doing so. Keep that in mind. You can still introduce dangerous distortion, right? If you have an amplifier that you've arced and then you crank it up to, to go spinal tap to 11, it's too much. At that point, you're still going to possibly fry your speaker. So we always do recommend, just obviously use your common sense, right? But ARC itself, you're not going to make any adjustments that are going to negatively damage it at the same volume level if you're listening reasonably. Whereas like an EQ, you would be able to do that. So a couple things you might notice here too. ARC as well is going to stop at about 5K automatically. So we're not going to do any correction above 5,000. There's a couple reasons behind this. One, those frequencies don't bounce off walls. They're much smaller. They don't actually reflect. So there's not a lot we can do with them, or we should bother doing. The other reason too is that as much as we believe that, hey, we make the best sounding speakers and we love the voicing of it, if you buy a nice anthem piece, I don't necessarily want your Bowers that you loved when you auditioned to turn into an anthem piece, right? So this is kind of the voicing of your speaker. Bass itself doesn't have that as much. Its presence or output in terms of that, but your treble can vary differently from one to another, right? Anyone who's heard a horn tweeter versus a dome versus a ribbon tweeter can kind of tell that stuff. If you want to, you can expand that. So this is a feature we give you for free that some of our competitors don't do. So you'll be able to actually expand it on a speaker by speaker basis. In this case, what we've actually done in this room, and I'll show you, this actually is tilted slightly down. So I've actually taken about a decibel, I think 1.25 decibels down off the high frequencies on a specific area on these, just to kind of make them a little less aggressive. And we do all that by applying that EQ to it. So that's our inverse. So anything that's played through that channel is played through that, and that corrects it for that room. So that's kind of how we get to that stuff. So just to kind of show you real quick. Apologies here, guys. Someone's taking my profile off. Actually, here, we'll play something for you first. Profile 1, if you're going to be making adjustments, I would leave this as your base profile. A couple of us have glasses in the room. When you go to get an optometrist to get a new prescription, they say, do you like 1, do you like 2? Do you like 2, do you like 3, right? But they do it in the same chair. They don't ask you to get up to the other chair, walk over, and then you don't have a frame of reference that way. So the best thing if you are trying to tailor this is to start with opening multiple profiles and making incremental adjustments. That way you can go back and forth, okay? So for the purposes of this, let's just leave these as named profile 1, 2, 3, and 4, because we're going to use these to kind of show you how you could adjust the sound signature as well as create interesting new profiles. Select those guys, all the measurements remain the same. If my profile 2 was actually just going to be my 2-channel, well, this is a 2-channel system already, but let's say I wanted a profile for vinyl and I don't want a subwoofer, I could remove the sub in profile 2. And then that way, as soon as I switch to that input, automatically the sub disappears. There's a different signature for these. They're playing full range. You can even turn arc on and off, specifically on different devices. So the biggest one we get oftentimes is people love the idea of room correction on a digital source, right? Makes sense because it's done digitally. When you get into things like turntables, people want to hear that pop, that hiss, that click, that stuff that's, you know, kind of that ethereal experience of vinyl. So in some cases, you might want to have your streamer so that it actually has arc enabled, and then when you switch to your input on your turntable, you can turn off processing entirely. So you can go from seeing how it sounds with room correction, how it sounds completely normal. So some interesting things you can do in that regard. And then this is where it's going to give us our adjustments. So if you want to do a night profile, here's where you would do things like reduce the overall target. That'll make sure that it's 3 decibels lower at the same volume. So in that way, if you have someone at home who's up late, you're less likely to annoy someone because even at the same volume, minus 25, it actually now sounds like minus 28. So small little things like that can be helpful. I'm just going to go through these guys. You can do different adjustments for your levels. Most of these are going to be set through ARC, you should be fine with. Here's the big one, is our ability to tailor our profile of our curve. So in this case, we have a room gain of 2.625. You'll notice as I increase room gain, if you watch this guy here, or the relationship between this and the sub. Sorry guys, love switching that when I do that. So that would be completely flat. That would be a perfect room. When I increase my room gain, the big difference between this versus something like a bass lift, like a bass and treble adjustment, it's not shelved. So if you have a bass or a treble, when you're moving it up, if you get +6, you're now hitting frequencies in the mid-range. So one of the cool things about ARC is you can augment your bass and you can leave all your mid-range frequencies still flat. If I want to, I can actually kick that back, so I'm only doing it on a small hump, or I can tailor the area that I'm looking for. If I'm really looking for a specific kick drum frequency or something like that, I can kind of try to hit that. This also allows you to catch some of the natural curve of your speaker. So we took a lot of this bass away. You still liked some of that. This is a way to get it back, but to have it less volatile. So it's kind of a neat thing to do in that. It's all safe in that regard too. When you are making adjustments to this, room gain is kind of your punch and your kick in your system. Deep bass boost, which I'll talk momentarily, is more your rumble and your growl. So that's going to affect primarily your subwoofer, or if you have very low crossover fronts. And I'll show you that momentarily. This guy here for room gain, that's your punch and your kick. Think of this as the volume. Think of this as how far into the range you want it. So do you want louder punch and kick at a smaller range? Do you want quieter punch and kick throughout the more musical range? When you're making adjustments to this, you guys might remember I mentioned before, the human ear generally hears the difference when it hits 2 decibels, right? So try to do incremental adjustments, but don't do them and you can do as small as I think 1/8 of a decibel. You will be here all day doing 1/8 of a decibel, right? So what you want to do at this point is you want to do jumps of probably about 1 to 1.5. Once you get to a point, if 1 is fine, 1.5 is okay, 2 is too much, bring it back a little bit at that point. In situations like my front right here, that's a noticeable dip still. So in order to counter this, if I wanted more bass, I would probably bring my crossover point back up to 80. And that way, instead of slipping off like this, I slope off a little faster, it's not going to hit that as much. You're going to notice this stuff too when you listen to it, but this is a way for you to identify and understand the graphs before you start putting it in. It'll help you when you're trying to play with room gain. Because like anything, you can make something sound worse than you had originally intended, right? So it's a tool out there for you. We hide it in this professional mode option for you. And it is safe to adjust with. It's just, I don't want you spending a whole afternoon and then coming back going, well, it sounds worse than it did the first time. So always try to check your work in that regard, okay guys? And then finally the sub here too. So in this case, the sub actually did pretty well, even with that boost down there. We were able to actually maintain the curve. And that's basically how that would work. When you're going to go to ARC 2, just a couple things for you. If you want to use professional mode, you're going to open to preferences. It will be in auto mode automatically, hence the auto mode. What we're going to suggest doing is change it to professional mode, and then it's going to mention you have to close the software and reopen it for those changes to take effect. Demo mode is something you can play around with yourself if you don't have an anthem yet. If you're waiting to get yours delivered, you want to play and learn a bit, you can access that and it'll walk you through the process I showed you today. Analytics, we just find more information about your room. We're trying to build a better mousetrap. We don't need to know your home or your address or your buying habits or anything like that. We're only interested in the room data. Beta updates. I will say this for pretty much anything that's ours. Beta updates, I would always contact your dealer first before looking at turning on beta updates. The idea of beta updates is we're putting something out there that we know may not be proper. So we need feedback on a little bit wider base. I've had instances before where people think beta just means I'm going to get early access to new features and everything's going to work great. It's not always the case. So if you are interested in beta or you've heard something, you're a forum guy, you're on that, reach out to your dealer first, and generally they will reach out to me and say, okay, well Brandon, if they put beta on, are they going to be pulling their hair out? You know, I'll say no, it's probably good, and you're probably good to go. And that's it. So from there, you would close it down, you're pretty much ready to go. Outside of that, guys, just always make sure when you finish your arc profile, you save it. The other nice thing about this is in the event you ever have any issues, you have a unit go down in the field from a power strike, something like that. Even something happens, you're calling technical support. I'm sure you've all done this before. Usually when you call electronics technical support, one of the first things we tell you is like, hey, look at, turn it off, turn it on again, or restart it. When you restart it, it's going to lose all this information on it. You're not going to be very happy, right? So having this file already for you, if it was perfect the way it is, nothing's changed in your room. All we've done is wipe the unit, you load it back on, you're back ready to go immediately. And that's pretty much it, guys.